during a flight. A black pastor was asked to remove his cross. Rather than reacting with anger, he rose and shared a message that captivated everyone. It was a pleasant Friday morning in late April when Pastor Elijah Rowe entered Raleigh-Durham International Airport through the sliding glass doors, pulling a small black carry-on behind him. He wasn't hurried, never was. At 58 years old, Elijah possessed the composed demeanor of someone who understood that serenity wasn't achieved through haste. His flight to Albuquerque was planned with a connection in Kansas City, and Flight 287 would transport him through the initial segment. He was wearing a light cream linen shirt, dark slacks, and worn brown shoes that had been present at numerous potluck dinners and hospital rooms beyond measure. However, what distinguished him wasn't his attire. It was the small wooden cross resting softly against his chest. It wasn't ostentatious or large. No gold, no diamonds, simply a piece of carved wood. The edges softened by years of use. His grandmother had given it to him when he was 18, shortly before her passing. "Wear it when the world forgets who you are," she told him. He hadn't taken off since. At gate C-21, Elijah located a quiet corner seat and retrieved a notepad. He didn't prepare his sermons on a laptop. He favored paper, appreciating the sound of pen against page. This week's message concerned forgiveness, once more. He quietly chuckled to himself. "It feels as though I'm meant to continue sharing what I'm still discovering," he murmured, taking a sip of lukewarm coffee from a paper cup. The boarding call came promptly. He rose, offered a pleasant good morning to the gate agent, and proceeded down the jet bridge. He gave a brief acknowledgement to the flight attendant stationed by the door. A tall woman with a formal demeanor and a precise tone. "Seat 22, Elijah spoke quietly to himself as he walked down the aisle. A young man was already settled into 22B, wearing headphones and a hoodie. Elijah offered a polite smile and took a seat by the window. The boy didn't acknowledge him. That was acceptable. Elijah didn't require conversation to feel at ease. He positioned the cross against his shirt and continued writing in his notebook. After 15 minutes, the cabin door closed. The aircraft began to pull away from the gate. The standard announcements were made, followed by the familiar, somewhat jarring sound as the plane accelerated down the runway. Elijah murmured a brief prayer as the plane ascended into the sky. He was halfway through his outline on Luke 6 when a voice broke his concentration. "Sir," a woman's voice said from the aisle. "Sir, excuse me." Elijah looked up to see the same tall flight attendant from earlier, standing beside him. "Yes, ma'am?" he asked, his eyes gentle. She did not smile. "Could you please tuck your necklace into your shirt?" Elijah blinked. "My cross." She nodded. "We've received some complaints." He looked around, surprised. "From whom?" She replied quickly, "I can't disclose that. We simply request that passengers be considerate of items that may cause discomfort to others." He studied her face for a moment. There was no warmth in it, no opportunity for discussion. "I'm sorry," Elijah said slowly, "but this necklace isn't a display. It's my faith. It was my grandmother's." "Sir, I'm not attempting to argue with you," she said, her voice tightening. "I'm requesting that you please comply with a straightforward request so we can avoid any additional issues." "Is this an airline policy?" Her lips formed a thin line. "I need your cooperation," she stated. The young man in 22B adjusted his hoodie and looked at Elijah, then averted his gaze. Elijah kept his hands still on his notebook. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't moved. "I'm sorry," he repeated, his tone even quieter this time. "But I won't be hiding it." The flight attendant released a breath through her nose, appearing visibly annoyed. "I'll be back," she said, and then turned and left. Elijah leaned back in his seat and looked out the window. Below them, the clouds spread out, a vast expanse of brilliant white. He touched the cross carefully, his thumb tracing the worn rim. This feeling wasn't unfamiliar, not precisely. Yet it felt altered, as if something had changed, though he couldn't yet identify what. The flight continued, and so did their discussion. The drink cart was 2 rows behind when she returned, without a smile, without warmth. She maintained the same rigid posture and that precise, formal tone, making each word feel like a protocol rather than an exchange. "Sir," she repeated, standing before Elijah's row, her arms now crossed. "I must ask you once more to secure the necklace." A woman, 2 rows above, expressed that she finds it objectionable. Elijah didn't reply immediately. He observed her intently. Her name tag indicated C. Densmore. Her uniform was immaculate, with not a single thread amiss. She repeatedly looked at the other passengers, seemingly searching for support or an observer. He focused his gaze forward. In row 20, a woman wearing a blue blazer and large sunglasses remained fixedly ahead. She didn't look back, didn't move restlessly, simply waited. "I understand what you're saying," Elijah responded steadily. "But I am innocent. I haven't spoken to anyone. I'm simply sitting here quietly. Why is this necklace causing a problem?" Claire Densmore's jaw tightened. "This isn't concerning your silence. It's important to be thoughtful. If someone finds something you're wearing upsetting, it's fair to ask you to modify it," Elijah stated calmly. "If someone is offended by my faith, I don't believe that gives them the right to suppress it." At that point, her tone changed. A hint of her composure faded. "You're being uncooperative," she said, her voice rising. "I am asking you respectfully, but you are being confrontational," and several heads turned. A woman situated 2 rows back extended into the aisle, observing. A man seated across from Elijah shifted his position to gain a clearer view. Elijah's pulse quickened, though his expression remained unchanged. He glanced toward the young man in 22B. The kid had retrieved his phone, subtly, not overtly. Screen angled upwards, thumb poised above the record button. "I'm not trying to provoke anyone," Elijah said, speaking deliberately. "But I won't conceal my cross. I won't take it away to accommodate another person's ease. I apologize." Claire expressed her disapproval. "Then we may have to escalate this," she stated firmly. "You're refusing to follow a directive from a flight crew member. That's a federal offense," someone exclaimed. "Are you serious?" Another voice inquired from a few rows back. A middle-aged man with a salt and pepper beard leaned into the aisle. "He's literally just sitting there," he observed. Claire disregarded him. "I'm going to inform the captain," she declared, maintaining eye contact with Elijah. "We'll handle this when we land." "Of course," Elijah responded. She turned and walked away again, this time with a quicker pace, speaking quietly to another flight attendant as she moved past the drink cart. The ensuing silence felt heavy. Elijah remained still in his seat, his pen still held between his fingers. The pages of his sermon notes shifted gently in the airflow from the overhead vent. Then a quiet voice emerged. "Sir," the boy beside him whispered, almost lost in the plane's hum. "I'm recording, just so you know, in case they attempt anything." Elijah slowly turned his head and offered the boy a thankful nod. "Thank you," he said softly. "I saw everything," the boy added. "She's way out of line," Elijah smiled slightly. "Sometimes it's not about the cross. It's about the person wearing it." The boy remained silent, but glanced down at his phone, which was still recording. 3 rows back, an older black woman whispered something to the person beside her. Her gaze met Elijah's for a brief moment. She offered him a subtle nod, as if acknowledging his presence and understanding his situation. That gesture carried weight. The intercom buzzed, and another attendant, not Claire, delivered a brief announcement regarding anticipated light turbulence. Standard procedure. However, the atmosphere on the plane had changed noticeably. Passengers were no longer solely focused on sleeping or entertainment. They were alert and observant. It wasn't the sort of attention Elijah desired, but his perspective had become secondary. Before the plane could land, an unexpected event occurred, one that even Elijah hadn't anticipated. By the time the plane stabilized after the turbulence warning, Claire Densmore returned to the aisle, but she was accompanied by another flight attendant. He was a younger man with dark hair and visibly nervous eyes. His name tag identified him as Jonas Worth, and unlike Claire, he lacked confidence in his demeanor. His steps were hesitant, appearing almost apologetic. "Mr. Rowe," Claire began, ensuring her voice carried to a significant portion of the cabin. "I've spoken with the captain. If you persist in disregarding crew instructions, we might need to take additional measures upon arrival." Elijah remained unperturbed. I would still appreciate knowing which policy I'm in violation of. You're becoming argumentative once more, Claire retorted. Jonas moved closer, observing the interaction. Perhaps we could simply... Claire interrupted him. Jonas, I'm managing this. And then it reappeared, that palpable tension, that familiar tone. Elijah stayed seated, outwardly calm, though his heart raced. Behind them, row 19 began to move. I don't see why he should be made to conceal his cross, a woman with curly red hair and a noticeable Wisconsin accent stated. I wear a Star of David necklace on every flight. I've never been addressed about it. Claire turned quickly. Ma'am, I am requesting you refrain from intervening. The woman responded, I'm not interfering. I'm simply observing that this feels like he's being unfairly targeted. At that moment, something changed noticeably. The atmosphere shifted. Passengers were no longer simply observing, but responding. A gentleman in seat 18D craned his neck. Is this truly how this airline handles situations? He inquired. I'm recording as well, and I understand how swiftly videos spread online. Claire appeared taken aback. She started to speak, then hesitated and closed her mouth. Elijah, Jonas said quietly, intervening and lowering his tone. Sir, I apologize truly. You've been entirely respectful. I believe we should reduce the tension. Let's allow this to pass. Claire's cheeks reddened. She looked at Jonas as if he had committed a betrayal. Then, with a visible effort to control herself, she hissed. He's disregarding a direct order. To do what? Elijah asked, maintaining his composure. To conceal a portion of myself that I've carried for 40 years? That doesn't seem correct to me, ma'am. Claire's jaw tightened again. I am finished. She turned and walked forcefully toward the front of the plane, her shoulders stiff with anger. Jonas remained behind, feeling unsure. I apologize for all of this, he said softly to Elijah. I believe she misinterpreted the circumstances, she responded. I think she understood perfectly, Elijah said calmly. She simply didn't approve of what she observed. Jonas lowered his gaze, then looked away. The cabin stabilized, but a feeling of unease lingered. Passengers murmured along the aisle, with some visibly shaking their heads. A cough broke the silence. The boy in 22B continued filming. Then Elijah took an unexpected action. He rose to his feet. Without raising his voice or gesturing, he stood in the confined area near his seat and angled himself so those in the surrounding rows could hear. I don't often speak in public spaces such as this, he began, his voice steady but quiet. But I believe it's important to say something. One by one, people turned to look at him. I'm a pastor, he continued. I serve a small church in Durham. This cross, he raised it carefully between his fingers, was a gift from my grandmother. She experienced events that many of us only read about. She advised me to wear this when the world attempted to define me. A brief silence followed. I have not removed it since her funeral. My reason isn't that I believe it improves me, but that it serves as a reminder to remain compassionate. Even when I am not shown kindness, a person in 24C covered their mouth. Another individual in 20F audibly sniffled. I understand not everyone shares my beliefs. I acknowledge and respect that, but I am certain I have acted appropriately. I remained still, adhered to every guideline, and attempted to be courteous, even when I felt diminished. He addressed Jonas directly. I do not require being asked to leave this flight. I pose no danger. I am merely a man traveling home to deliver a sermon on forgiveness on Sunday. The atmosphere on the plane was subdued, yet sometimes silence conveys more than words ever could, and the quietness wasn't going to last much longer. Claire had not reappeared since she departed. The whereabouts of Eleanor remained uncertain, whether she was in the galley, visibly upset, or once again speaking with the captain. It was unclear. However, the atmosphere in the cabin had shifted. It wasn't just one person standing. Instead, a sense of reality had permeated the space, manifesting in every hushed exchange and fleeting look shared among those seated within 30 rows. Elijah quietly resumed his seat, as if finishing a chapter in a novel. He sought no accolades and craved no validation. He simply released a breath. The young man next to him ceased recording, though he kept his phone in hand. "You sure you're pastor?" he inquired softly, a slight smirk playing on his lips. Elijah laughed. "Some Sundays I question it myself," he admitted. The young man chuckled and glanced at his phone screen. "That's already being shared. People need to hear things like that." A few minutes elapsed. Following that, the woman in the blue blazer, the one Claire had mentioned complained about, gradually turned from 2 rows forward. Her sunglasses were now removed. She appeared to be in her mid-50s, with a tense expression, yet there was a gentleness about her. I remained silent. She spoke in a matter-of-fact tone. Elijah lifted his eyebrows. "Mom, I never said I was upset. I didn't mention your necklace." The atmosphere became quiet once more. Several passengers who had been listening seemed interested. "She simply inquired if I was all right," the woman added, and I replied that I hadn't observed anything. "Are you suggesting Claire wasn't truthful?" Someone murmured behind Elijah. The woman in the blazer remained silent. She pivoted, appearing somewhat less confident. Jonas emerged from the front of the plane. His shirt now had a slight wrinkle, as if he's been twisting his hands. He stopped near Elijah's row and bent down a little, speaking quietly. "The captain is aware," he said. "And just so you know, you're not in any trouble. We're not removing you. There's no written reprimand." "Nothing." Elijah nodded. "Thank you for letting me know." Jonas expressed regret that things hadn't unfolded differently, noting that occasionally individuals carry emotional burdens that extend beyond physical luggage. Elijah offered a subtle smile in agreement, commenting that this phenomenon is evident in various settings, not just airplanes. Jonas paused, then continued, "I'm not sure if this is inappropriate, but would you be comfortable with me attending your church sometime? I used to go when I was younger, but it's been a long time." Elijah's smile widened. "Certainly. Please do. I'll be sure to reserve a place for you." Jonas gently touched the armrest before departing. As he moved back up the aisle, a woman seated opposite Elijah bent forward. "Pastor," she murmured, "thank you." He observed her. She appeared older, possibly in her 70s. A long green scarf adorned her, and her hands rested in her lap, as if guarding something delicate. "You didn't need to speak," she said, "but you did." "Sometimes silence can feel heavier than a voice," Elijah replied. She smiled, her eyes glistening. "That is precisely it." The boy beside Elijah nudged him gently. Elijah gazed out the window. "Let's just hope I'm preaching the same on Sunday as I'm living right now," he thought. A woman with curly hair, whom he's seen before, spoke from behind. "I think the Lord already gave you your sermon, Pastor," she said. "You just preached it at 35,000 feet. Laughter rippled through the cabin, soft, sincere, and welcome. Conversations started again, moving beyond quiet murmurs. A sense of energy and relief filled the cabin, as if it had expelled something it had been containing. However, Claire was still missing. But when she ultimately returned, she would not be alone, and she would not anticipate what awaited her. Approximately 40 minutes had passed since Claire's disappearance. It was believed she would remain missing until the landing. Yet, just as the seatbelt sign illuminated once more, she reappeared, accompanied by the captain himself. Captain Raymond Stills was in his mid-40s, gray hair buzzed close, weathered skin from years in cockpits. He didn't appear angry. He didn't appear rushed. But there was something in his face, an alert stillness, like someone who had seen far worse and didn't want to make a situation worse than it already was. He stopped beside Elijah's row and crouched slightly, just as Jonas had. "Sir," he said in a low, calm voice, "my name's Ray. I understand there's been some tension on board." Elijah met his gaze directly. "Captain," I remained silent. "This cross I'm wearing appeared to cause concern for a flight attendant. She requested that I conceal it. I declined." Ray observed the necklace, then noted Elijah's composed demeanor. "I appreciate your manner," the captain said. "It's more significant than you realize these days." Claire stood rigidly behind him, her arms crossed. Those seated around appeared to be ignoring the situation, yet no one was wearing headphones. All were attentively listening. "I've spoken with my crew," Ray said, "and I've reviewed the footage. Several passengers had documented portions of the interaction, including the young man seated nearby. Elijah briefly looked at the teenager, who offered a subtle nod, still clutching his phone as if it were a barrier. Ray rose and surveyed the adjacent rows. "I want to be clear," he stated, his voice now more pronounced. "This airline has no rule against religious symbols, be it a cross, a hijab, a yarmulke, or another item. Passengers may express their beliefs provided they do so respectfully. Based on observations, Pastor Rowe has been acting in that manner, prompting nods and applause from several people." Quiet, polite, and without drama, Ray addressed Claire. "We're going to have a more in-depth conversation after we land." Claire offered no reply. Her expression remained unreadable, but her jaw was tense. She turned and walked back toward the galley without another word. Ray leaned toward Elijah. "You're not in trouble. You never were. I apologize on behalf of the crew." "You don't have to," Elijah replied, "but I appreciate it." Ray offered a small smile. "Well, some things are still worth saying." And with that, he returned to the cockpit. Jonas reappeared moments later and quietly offered Elijah a free drink and snack box. "Captain's orders," he said sheepishly. "You deserve at least that," Elijah chuckled. "I'll take the almonds." As the plane began its descent into Kansas City, a different feeling settled over the cabin. People were chatting again, not nervously but openly. Two men who hadn't spoken the whole flight were now exchanging church stories. A young woman pulled out her Bible and started highlighting verses. A toddler across the aisle waved at Elijah, and his mother mouthed, "Thank you." Elijah simply sat back and completed his sermon notes. He wrote, "Forgiveness, but not silence." The older woman in green across the aisle retrieved a pen and wrote something on a napkin, then passed it to Elijah. He unfolded it and read, "You reminded us how to carry grace." "Thank you." He folded the napkin and placed it into his notebook. The plane began its final descent, but there was a quiet sense of closure. It felt as though something had broken and then repaired itself, if only a little. Unbeknownst to Elijah, the event wasn't concluded. The world beyond that plane had already taken notice. Flight 287 landed in Kansas City just after 4:20 p.m. The tires made a soft thumping sound as they touched the runway. The standard chime occurred. Passengers unfastened their seatbelts. The overhead compartments released with a click. Yet, a peculiar stillness permeated the movement, as if no one wished to be the first to disrupt the significance of what had transpired in the air. As the plane taxied toward the gate, a flight attendant, someone other than Claire, announced over the intercom. Her voice sounded nervous, almost shaky. She expressed gratitude for everyone flying with them that day. For those continuing their journey to Albuquerque, boarding would resume shortly after a brief pause. Elijah waited patiently. He consistently prioritized allowing others to disembark first. He remained seated with his hands resting on his notebook, his cross still noticeable as the aisle emptied. When he eventually stood to collect his bag, Jonas greeted him at the plane's front. "Sir," he stated, "there are 2 airport officers just outside the jet bridge. They're not here for you. They simply want to speak briefly with the crew and take a statement." Elijah raised an eyebrow. Was someone pressing charges? "No," they replied, but once the footage started spreading, someone tagged airport security, then a few others. "I suppose people are watching." Elijah stepped off the plane and into the fluorescent-lit walkway. 2 officers stood to the side, but neither approached him. They spoke softly with a woman holding a clipboard, presumably a gate supervisor. Jonas acknowledged him with a nod and returned to the aircraft. Inside the terminal, Elijah located a quiet seat near the window. He retrieved his phone for the first time in hours, revealing 30 new messages, missed calls, and a voicemail from his assistant at the church. However, a notification at the top of the screen caught his attention. A video had gone viral. It was the recording from the teen in seat 22B, now shared on TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube. The caption stated, "Flight attendant attempts to embarrass pastor for wearing a cross." See his response. It had over 800,000 views and was increasing. Elijah watched only a few seconds. The video showed him seated calmly, Claire standing over him. Her voice was sharp, his reply quiet and steady. Then it shifted to his impromptu speech, the cross visible between his fingers. He turned the phone face down. He disliked attention, always had. He wasn't a person seeking headlines or clicks. A deeper feeling resonated within him. It wasn't pride, nor was it fear. It was the weight of being observed. A few minutes passed, and the teenager from 22B approached him. "Hey," the boy said, slightly winded. "I'm getting off here. My layover is in KC. I just wanted to say thanks again for not reacting negatively." Elijah smiled. "You accomplished more than I did." "You spoke the truth," the kid laughed. "No, man, you experienced it. I simply captured it on video." He extended his hand. "I'm Tyrell, by the way." "Elijah," they responded, shaking hands. The boy departed, his phone still in his hand, now with a more upright posture. Elijah reclined and rubbed his eyes. The day's burden began to weigh heavily on him. Immediately, his phone vibrated, displaying a message from his assistant. The church board viewed the video. They requested he address the matter on Sunday. Discussions about it were widespread. He rested his head against the terminal window. Outside, a plane was ascending. The engines created a powerful roar. The sun had descended just enough to illuminate the wings in gold. This was not what he had envisioned. He had come seeking tranquility and found himself amidst turmoil. Yet, perhaps storms were not always intended to be averted. For sometimes, the most profound teachings begin well before the formal setting and resonate far beyond the conclusion of a journey. Sunday morning arrived sooner than Elijah anticipated. He stood behind the pulpit at Grace Fellowship in Durham, the same location where he'd delivered sermons almost every week for the preceding 18 years. However, this time, the atmosphere felt altered. The seating was more densely filled. Unfamiliar faces occupied the pews, some from different churches, and others seemingly from nowhere. Phones were already capturing video before he began speaking. He chose not to start with scripture this time. He advanced, set his notes to the side, and surveyed the audience. "Most of you viewed the video," he started. "Some of you shared it, while others placed calls. Some expressed anger. Some inquired why I didn't shout, why I didn't call her out, why I didn't fight back." He paused, allowing the atmosphere to become still. "I've considered that as well. I've been reflecting on it consistently since." There were no microphone issues, no sounds of discomfort, just a quiet stillness. I remained composed on that plane, not from a place of fragility or fear, but because I've experienced enough to understand that the most prominent voice isn't always the most powerful. Occasionally, fortitude lies in remaining still when every instinct urges action. Occasionally, it's about declining with composure rather than anger, heads affirmed throughout the sanctuary. I didn't display that cross to instigate anyone. I wore it because it serves as a reminder of my identity. And when someone asks you to conceal the very essence that formed you, you are presented with two options: suppress your being to ease others, or remain steadfast and allow the resulting unease to reside with another. He glanced across the first row. Terrell was present beside Elijah's assistant. He offered a slight smile. The incident on that flight affected everyone. It highlighted how frequently we are instructed to be less assertive, quieter, and more accommodating. However, the reality is that one's beliefs, personal narrative, and cultural background are not liabilities. They are not something to be regretted, nor are they expendable. He touched the small wooden cross he wore and lifted it with care. "My grandmother gifted me this not for its appearance, but for its enduring significance. She told me, they'll try to take your voice. Don't hand them your silence, too." A low murmur ran through the crowd. Grief, pride, recognition. He took a deep breath. "I don't hate the woman from a plane. I'm not angry, but I hope she saw something that day that challenged her. And I hope we all remember, just because the world can't carry your truth doesn't mean you need to hide it." He stepped back. The congregation stood without prompting. It wasn't applause. It wasn't noise. A palpable sense of unity arose, as if a profound understanding transcended mere words. Following the service, Elijah emerged into the fresh spring air. Individuals approached him, extending handshakes, embraces, and cards. Some were visibly moved to tears. One woman gently placed her hand on his shoulder and quietly said, "You gave me permission to stop hiding." By that evening, the video had garnered 3.2 million views. Media organizations began contacting him, requesting interviews and soliciting editorials. But Elijah remained focused on his local community. His inbox remained full, yet his hand continued its work, visiting a family in the hospital, organizing food for the shelter, and completing the next week's sermon. The cross never left his neck, and for each story that arrived concerning someone standing up, speaking out, or simply choosing not to shrink, he'd whisper a quiet prayer. Not for praise, but for courage. The kind that doesn't roar, just the kind that remains. Because real change doesn't always begin with a protest or a headline. It begins with one person choosing to remain present. And if this story resonated with you, please don't simply move on, but share it, discuss it. And always remember to remain true to yourself, even when it's simpler to conform. Mr. Braddock, the calculus teacher at Eisenberg High in Elkhart, Indiana, made a light-hearted gesture, singling out the janitor for amusement in front of the class. However, when a man calmly approached the board and solved the problem with unexpected skill, the room fell silent, fundamentally altering the school's perception of him. This occurred during fourth period on a Thursday, a typical day at Eisenberg High where students often watch the clock more than the lesson. Mr. Braddock had a certain reputation. Known for his sharp wit, impatience, and sarcastic remarks, he was a figure who evoked tolerance rather than affection. The classroom felt stale. Equations covered the whiteboard. A subtle scent of eraser dust and old sneakers permeated the air. Phones lay hidden beneath desks. A few students feigned attention, while others gazed out the window. Then, an event occurred, altering the classroom's atmosphere dramatically. While Mr. Braddock wrote another derivative on the board, a quiet squeak drifted in from the hallway. The janitor was close by, mopping just outside the classroom with his characteristic slow, steady pace. Braddock stopped speaking, looked toward the door, and gave a slight smile. Suddenly, he turned to the class and indicated the hallway. "Look who's here," he said. "Tell me, do you think you can solve this one?" He struck the board with his marker, mimicking a game show challenge. A ripple of laughter followed, not loud, but the type that makes you subtly adjust your posture, unsure of its appropriateness. Mr. Braddock smiled knowingly. "Come on, Lamar." Lamar Dorsey, a 52-year-old janitor, stood in the hallway, holding his mop. The familiar blue uniform, clean but faded, was on him, displaying L. Dorsey embroidered above his chest pocket. He remained still, showing no reaction. His gaze swept across the room. Then, deliberately, he entered. A mop rested against the wall. Several students straightened. Some anticipated a clever remark or a sudden departure. Perhaps a jest or simply a walkout. However, that didn't happen. Instead, Lamar proceeded to the front of the room. "You mind?" he inquired quietly, indicating the board with a gesture. Braddock raised his brows. "Be my guest." Several phones silently emerged from backpacks. One girl whispered, "Is he serious?" But nobody interrupted Lamar. He picked up the marker, examined the equation, and paused, not because he was unsure, but as if he were considering something. Intensely, like someone studying a well-known map. He narrowed his eyes slightly. Then he began to write. There was no theatrics, no embellishment, just careful strokes, one line following another. The room became unnervingly quiet. The only sounds were the marker on the whiteboard and a chair creaking as someone leaned forward. Mr. Braddock crossed his arms, observing intently. His expression remained unchanged, though his jaw tightened. Lamar explained the steps aloud, his voice quiet and patient. "See, this here's a chain rule problem, but the trick is recognizing the inner function first. Once you isolate that, it becomes a lot cleaner." He moved with the ease of someone experienced, not just with the problem, but with the teaching. His manner was unassuming and not arrogant. He clarified matters straightforwardly, with clarity, as if he's dedicated more effort to instruction than to menial tasks. Upon completion, he secured the marker and retreated. The board displayed meticulous, well-structured work. He addressed Braddock, then the class. "That's one approach," he stated. And briefly, stillness reigned. A junior student in the rear murmured. He understood it correctly. Mr. Braddock remained silent. Not instantly. His mouth parted a little, but no words emerged. The silence became more pronounced than any joke he could have delivered. Lamar nodded politely and retreated to the door. He gathered his mop. There was no applause, no self-promotion, only that quiet assurance, as if he hadn't just dramatically altered the room. But as Lamar reached for the chalk, no one anticipated what would follow. No one stirred. For a complete 10 seconds, it felt as though the class had been pulled from a dream and placed into something authentic. The sort of moment that doesn't typically occur in a high school classroom. Lamar Dorsey, known as Mr. Dorsey, was in the process of leaving when a comment was made. Had he just thought that? It was Wes Hanley, a senior seated in the front row, who rarely spoke unless it concerned academic performance. He was completely serious. His eyes were wide with surprise. He glanced back at the board, as if a solution might have altered during a brief moment of closure. Braddock then spoke, his tone even and somewhat annoyed. He acknowledged that Mr. Dorsey had, nonetheless, provided the correct answer. His voice lacked its typical sarcasm. A different feeling seemed present, perhaps confusion, or even something like discomfort. Lamar looked back. "I worked with numbers extensively in the past," he stated, then offered a slight shrug. "They remain with me." Several students chuckled, not directed at him this time, but because the atmosphere was easing. Lamar didn't pause for a reply. He departed, mop in hand, his shoes squeaking quietly down the hallway, as if nothing had occurred. It was as if he hadn't just resolved a complex academic challenge in less than 3 minutes without using a calculator. That's when the phones appeared. Someone had recorded the entire incident. Carly Benson, a junior in the third row, had already begun editing the video before the school bell sounded. In the hallway between classes, the topic of conversation was solely focused on the event. "Did you see Mr. Dorsey?" Braddock's expression. He appeared as if someone had disconnected him. Where did he acquire that knowledge? It was believed he only cleaned floors. By lunchtime, the video appeared on TikTok and then Instagram. It was unedited, simply a shaky view of Lamar's hands working on the board, accompanied by a voice saying, "Yo, he's solving it." The text accompanying the video stated, "Our janitor just outperformed the calculus teacher." Some people found it amusing. Others observed it with disbelief. Nevertheless, the excitement continued to build. In the teacher's lounge, the atmosphere was similarly charged. "Are you suggesting he completed a full derivative chain problem mentally?" inquired Ms. Lin, the physics teacher. She had paused, mid-bite of her sandwich, and so did he, muttered Mr. Crane, the English teacher. Didn't use notes. Didn't even pause. It was like muscle memory. Braddock was at the corner table, seemingly grading papers. He remained silent. However, Principal Everett spoke. He had been at the school for 6 years. It was surprising that no one knew he had an academic background. People shook their heads. Few people really knew much about Lamar. He arrived early. He left late. The floors were always clean. Light bulbs rarely failed within a day. The man worked in silence. However, he was no longer simply the man behind the mop. Down the hallway, a group of students waited near the janitor's closet. They weren't there to report a spill or request a broom. They simply wanted to speak with him. One student, a 12-year-old boy holding his geometry book, inquired, "Do you tutor Mr. Dorsey?" Lamar blinked. "I haven't in a long time," he replied. "You should," the boy suggested. That was a kind thing to say. Lamar chuckled, but it wasn't unkind. "I'm simply astonished." During the third period the following day, Braddock's demeanor had changed. He refrained from making jokes. He didn't call on students arbitrarily. He spoke with his gaze directed at the board, his voice more subdued than normal. It wasn't voiced directly, but it was obvious to all. Following the class, Wes approached him. "Mr. Braddock, regarding that incident with Mr. Dorsey yesterday, he employed the very method you demonstrated last week. The chain rule, correct?" Braddock nodded once. "That is correct, only he articulated it more effectively." Braddock remained silent. However, The truly startling aspect wasn't the proposed solution itself. It was what Lamar said following it. Lamar Dorsey hadn't intended to create a disturbance. He generally avoided being the focus of attention. This had been the case since his youth. Consequently, when students began congregating near the maintenance closet simply to converse, or when teachers directed extended glances his way in the hallways, he felt uneasy. He lowered his gaze and continued with his regular activities. Restocking paper towels, repairing a leaky faucet in the boys' locker room, and cleaning cafeteria tables consumed his time. However, he began to notice a subtle change. There was a perceptible shift in how people regarded him, as if they were attempting to place him within a framework they hadn't previously recognized. This wasn't merely curiosity, it was a mixture of confusion, respect, and perhaps regret. The sensation made him uncomfortable. Later that afternoon, Principal Everett requested that he visit the front office. He entered, still wearing his gloves, his uniform slightly damp from cleaning the cafeteria sinks. He took off his cap as a gesture of respect. Everett leaned forward in his chair, his hands clasped together. "Lamar, may I ask you a question? Do you have experience in education or engineering?" Lamar paused. He glanced downwards briefly, as if revisiting a long-forgotten aspect of himself. "I attended Purdue," he said softly. "Mechanical engineering. Full scholarship." The principal leaned back, eyebrows raised. "You serious?" was Lamar's reply. He had plans. Things got complicated, and for the first time in a long while, he began to recount the story. He'd grown up in Gary, Indiana. A bright young man, he's always been fascinated by how things worked. Motors, pulleys, anything he could take apart and put back together. His mother, Estelle, raised him and his two sisters on her own. She worked overtime at a textile plant and still found time to read to them every night. She held a deep conviction that education offered the sole path to advancement, frequently stating, "Books first, always." She explained that the world might attempt to deny opportunity, but possessing your own key ensured access. Lamar secured that key. He was valedictorian, a winner at the state science fair, and then received a scholarship to Purdue. During his freshman year, he was already tutoring fellow students. Instructors noticed his name on the attendance roster and took note. However, sophomore year brought a life-altering phone call. His mother had collapsed at work. Medical professionals diagnosed her with advanced cancer. When Lamar arrived at the hospital, she was struggling to remain conscious. "I can handle this," she murmured. He disregarded her request and did not return home. He took a semester off from school, then another. He found employment, working in a warehouse and doing overnight shifts at a grocery store. He worked to cover expenses. Academic pursuits became less important. So did the dream. When his mother died, possessions were disorganized. He lacked a place to return to, lacked funds to complete his degree, and received no communication from a guidance counselor checking on his absence. "I repeatedly thought I would return to school," Lamar told Everett. But one situation led to another. Life doesn't wait for anyone. The principal remained silent. The narrative carried weight, not melodrama. It was simply authentic, the sort of existence one rarely encounters unless actively inquired about. At his residence, Lamar stored his academic records in a box situated beneath his bed. He possessed a faded Purdue sweatshirt, an antique calculator, and a photograph of himself and his mother from orientation day. He had not used any of these items, yet he kept them. Now they were being revisited. That evening, he was seated on the rear steps of his modest apartment complex. The sky was dusky, with a stillness punctuated only by the distant murmur of vehicles. He drank tea from a metal thermos and gazed into the distance. It had been years since he's considered calculus. It had been a while since his last tutoring job, before he left school, and now it reappeared, like a familiar face at his door. But a single choice threatened to undo all his efforts. While in college, Lamar had vowed to take a brief respite, stabilize his family situation, and then complete his education successfully. However, life rarely follows plans, particularly those founded on hope. Following his mother's passing, Lamar went back to Gary, attempting to rebuild. His sisters were still in high school, struggling to manage. Bills accumulated on the counter. The landlord demanded rent, and no one from Purdue contacted him to inquire about his disappearance. He accepted any available work. He worked as a stockroom loader, a janitor at a strip mall, and provided overnight security at a shipping yard. Anything that provided sufficient income to pay the electricity bill. His education receded further and further from his immediate concerns. Initially, he would occasionally contact the university to inquire about reapplying and transferring credits. Forms were sent to him. He completed them. However, he didn't mail them. There was always an obstacle. Then came a critical moment. It occurred in late November. A man named Frank Booker, the owner of a flooring company in South Bend, had offered Lamar consistent employment. "You're capable," he stated. "Don't squander your time sweeping floors. I'll personally train you." Lamar felt hopeful again, having a genuine opportunity. However, the day before his start date, his youngest sister, Alana, was involved in a school altercation. A disagreement that quickly worsened. She had injured someone's nose. Expulsion was threatened. Lamar felt compelled to be present. No one else would support her. Consequently, he missed his first day at the flooring job. Frank reassigned the position to another person. And that was the end of it. An opportunity was lost. He relinquished his pursuit of dreams and instead prioritized stability. Years passed indistinctly. He moved from town to town, holding various jobs. He maintained a clean record and avoided legal issues, simply focusing on survival. Quietly. When he reached Elkhart in his early 40s, he wasn't seeking a fresh start. He simply wanted a reliable income. The school district provided benefits. Summers were peaceful. He accepted the janitor position without hesitation. He found it agreeable in his own way. It was predictable. The work was clean. Students left him undisturbed. Teachers offered polite smiles. He didn't anticipate friendship or belonging. He didn't require it. He remained inconspicuous. He cleaned up messes and vanished before the last bell rang. Yet, numbers remained with him. Occasionally, after successfully completing a math course, he would briefly observe the board. He'd see a formula and mentally solve it. It felt akin to muscle memory, a facet of his mind that remained keen even as other aspects succumbed to the weight of habit. He would return home, prepare a simple supper, grilled fish, brown rice, perhaps some carrots, and peruse a vintage engineering book he stored behind the cereal boxes, just to confirm his abilities. He invariably did. He simply lacked an opportunity to demonstrate them. Then Mr. Braddock addressed him that day. And now, changes were occurring, not only at school, but also within him. He reflected on the students who waited outside his supply closet with questions. He thought about Wes Hanley visiting that morning with a folded piece of paper and saying, "Mr. Dorsey, I attempted to solve that same problem. Could you review it for me?" And Lamar had, with care, methodically. He clarified where Wes had made a mistake without causing embarrassment. Wes smiled when he finally grasped the concept. It wasn't solely a matter of pride. It was about a sense of belonging. That feeling lingered. However, not everyone reacted positively. Braddock, in particular, became unusually reserved. Students observed it. Teachers observed it. The experience of being surpassed by someone he hadn't previously considered a significant figure in front of his class clearly affected him. He didn't respond aggressively. Instead, his responses became more abrupt, his tolerance diminished. Any mention of Lamar in the lounge was swiftly redirected. He was not accustomed to being overshadowed, especially not by someone who had been unknown to him until now. But life held one more surprise, and this one brought him back to mathematics. The video didn't remain within Eisenberg High. It spread beyond. It began with a local student page reposting it, accompanied by the caption, "When your janitor turns out to be smarter than your teacher." Then it appeared on a regional education forum. By the weekend, it had spread across state lines. People online were astonished. They weren't mocking Lamar, they were impressed. He explained it with greater clarity than my college professor. Someone should give this man a classroom and a chalkboard, not a mop. It's a reminder that you never know someone's story. By Monday morning, Lamar had no idea any of this was occurring. He didn't use social media. He still had a flip phone. When he arrived at work, The first thing he did was repair a jammed paper towel dispenser in the girls' bathroom, just like he always did on Mondays. But something felt different. Conversations stopped as he passed. Students nodded, not out of duty, but with an unusual sense of respect. Some even smiled, as if meeting him for the first time. "Hey, Mr. Dorsey," a girl called out as he neared the library. "You're kind of famous now." Lamar chuckled quietly. However, when he rounded the corner, Wes Hamley was there, accompanied by two other students. One held a calculus book. A problem was indicated, marked in pink. "Would you mind going through this with us?" Wes asked. Lamar looked around, seemingly confused. "You got a free period?" Someone inquired. We made time. And so, in the hallway, surrounded by lockers and science fair posters, Lamar sat down on the floor with three teenagers and guided them through a multivariable equation. Step by step, line by line. He didn't lecture them. He engaged with them. It wasn't boisterous or extravagant, but a significant moment unfolded. Further down the hallway, someone recorded the incident. Lamar wasn't informed. He likely would have disapproved. Returning to the office, Principal Everett was speaking with a member of the local school board. Affirming the information, she stated, "Lamar Dorsey. He's been with us for 6 years. No, he's not faculty, he's a custodian." She hesitated, then responded, "Well, I wouldn't describe it as unorthodox. I'd say it was overlooked." Simultaneously, in the teacher's lounge, Braddock was reviewing an email shared by a parent containing a link to the now viral video. He closed the laptop without watching it. That afternoon, Everett called Lamar back in, offered him a seat. Lamar stayed standing. "I've got a request from the board," the principal said. "They want to know if you'd be interested in running an after-school tutoring program. Small group, voluntary, just a trial run." Lamar didn't answer right away. "You'd be paid, of course," Everett added. "This isn't about changing your existing responsibilities, but rather expanding them." Reflecting on the skills he still possesses, Lamar glanced at his hands. They were calloused, clean, and worn. "I haven't taught in a long time," he stated. "You haven't ceased to know," Everett responded. Lamar raised his gaze. There was no strain evident in the man's tone, only a straightforward suggestion. "I will consider it," he said. That evening, he retrieved the aged cardboard box from beneath his bed. It contained the Purdue sweatshirt, the transcripts, and the orientation photo. He hadn't touched it in years. He spread everything out on the table. The paper had yellowed slightly. The edges were curled, but the words remained. That was the nature of knowledge. It didn't fade. It simply waited. He didn't need to become popular online. He didn't care about the views or the comments. But knowing he could still make a difference resonated with him. However, while some were impressed, others were not pleased by his growing recognition. As Lamar gained more recognition, the school environment started to change. This transformation initially manifested in the student body. Those who previously ignored him in the hallways began to greet him. Some even sought his assistance with homework during class breaks. Within 2 weeks, a small group of students had informally established what they termed Dorsey sessions. After school, they would gather in the library, notebooks ready, concentrating as Lamar elucidated ideas with a surprising clarity that everyone acknowledged. Soon, teachers noticed. Ms. Lynn, the physics teacher, was the first to visit the library and observe him assisting the students. "You possess a talent," she remarked gently, "and it's not limited to calculations." However, not all reactions were positive. Mr. Braddock had remained silent regarding Lamar since the initial event. Within the teacher's lounge, he presented an outward appearance of normalcy. However, his silences betrayed a lingering bitterness. His speech was concise and abrupt. He avoided direct eye contact with Lamar and never referenced calculus. During a parent-teacher meeting, when Lamar's increasing impact on the students was discussed, Braddock stated, "It's good they're interested in math. Let's just make sure we don't blur the line between instruction and inspiration." While seemingly courteous, the underlying tone was unmistakable to everyone present. The principal didn't ignore the situation. He summoned Braddock to his office one morning and explained the issue directly. "I know it was difficult," Everett remarked, "but Lamar didn't shame you. He motivated them," Braddock conceded, adjusting in his chair. "He may lack formal credentials, but he's educated significantly more than we initially understood. And crucially, he's connecting with students in a manner that we haven't been able to. Braddock started to speak, then stopped. There was little to add. Lamar continued with his established schedule. He didn't request an official position. He didn't desire any preferential consideration. However, when Principal Harding suggested a small payment to continue the tutoring sessions, he agreed. The motivation wasn't financial, it simply felt appropriate. Consequently, he began carrying a small binder. Within it were pages of problems, blank worksheets, and notes he'd written by hand. During breaks, he'd sit in the back corner of the cafeteria and jot down formulas from memory, sometimes acknowledging a student who'd call out, "Hey, Mr. D." One afternoon, Carly, the student who filmed the original clip, approached him near the vending machines. "Did you ever want to be a teacher?" she asked. Lamar paused before replying. "I want to build things. Teach later, maybe, but life had different ideas." Carly responded, handing him a new mechanical pencil. "I think you're doing both now." He smiled. "Thank you." However, beneath this pleasantness, there was underlying tension. Some parents had begun contacting the school. While the response was largely positive, a single, anonymous concern reached the board. The question raised was whether it was appropriate for a janitor to tutor students within the school. Concerns were also voiced regarding his certification and background checks for instruction. Everett addressed the matter promptly. He is a district employee and has not acted inappropriately. It was suggested that if genuine concern was the driver, a direct conversation with me would have occurred. He did not inform Lamar about the complaint. Nevertheless, Lamar sensed a subtle tension present. Some individuals seemed unsure how to perceive him now that he no longer blended into the periphery. Then, one afternoon, Braddock took an unexpected action. He entered the library during one of Lamar's tutoring sessions. He observed silently from a distance as Lamar explained integrals to a group of 4 students. After roughly 10 minutes, he approached. "Do you mind if I sit in?" Braddock inquired. Lamar looked up. His expression remained unchanged. He gestured toward a chair. The students laughed, just enough to lighten the moment. Braddock smirked. For once, it wasn't mean. They sat together that day, saying little, but it was a start. Lamar Dorsey wasn't interested in titles. He had something else in mind. It wasn't about proving anything anymore. For Lamar Dorsey, standing at the whiteboard in the library with students gathered around, it was never about redemption or revenge. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He didn't seek recognition. He simply showed up for them, the kids, the ones who reminded him of the boy he once was. Every Tuesday and Thursday, right after the final bell, that corner of the library filled with chatter, questions, scribbled notes, and wide eyes as Lamar walked students through math problems they once feared. Not because he possessed all the answers, but because he helped them believe they could discover those answers themselves. That's what mattered. Isaiah, a freshman who previously struggled with algebra last semester, is now confidently solving quadratic equations. Tasha, who once disliked math, is now conducting brief study groups on weekends for her cousins, utilizing notes from Lamar. Lamar didn't lecture from the front of the room like a conventional teacher. Instead, he sat alongside his students, engaged in conversation, and posed questions before providing answers. Consequently, an increasing number of teachers began visiting. They weren't there to monitor, but simply to observe his methods. Ms. Lynn inquired about utilizing some of his explanations in her class. Coach Rivera asked if Lamar would assist in establishing a summer preparation group for incoming freshmen. Even Braddock, typically hesitant and prideful, began visiting frequently. While not every day, he visited often enough. He would quietly suggest a couple of additional problems and eventually started offering words of encouragement to the students. The sharpness in his voice lessened. A change occurred within him, softening his demeanor. During one tutoring session, Braddock stayed behind after the students had departed. "You know," he remarked, glancing at the board, "I once believed this position conferred significance upon me. That teaching provided authority." Lamar remained silent. "But you're showing me what it truly involves, consistently being present and ensuring that each moment has value." Lamar simply nodded in agreement. Everyone occasionally strays from their path. He was not one to bear resentment. He had no need to. Principal Everett summoned him again a month later. A suggestion was put forward to establish his sessions as a non-credit elective class next semester, designed for enrichment and to build students' confidence. Everett cautioned that we would need to navigate some administrative processes. Lamar responded, shaking his head gently, and stated that he appreciated the offer but did not require the formal recognition. He preferred to maintain a simple approach, encouraging attendance based on genuine interest rather than a fixed schedule. Everett agreed, nodding, and assured him that they would provide support in any way possible. News of his efforts extended past the school district. A reporter from a local news outlet visited to conduct an interview. Lamar chose to keep his comments brief, avoiding sensationalism and self-promotion. "I'm simply demonstrating what they already possess," he stated. "Sometimes it requires a bit of time to recognize it." In the spring, Eisenberg High held its yearly student showcase, featuring science projects, art displays, and choir performances. In one corner of the gym, a booth called Dorsey's Table showcased student reflections on math, life, and confidence. Many students wrote about how Lamar had helped them discover more about themselves. This wasn't because he provided answers, but because he listened and showed belief. By the end of the night, people had stopped asking, "Is he the janitor?" Instead, they were saying, "That's Mr. Dorsey." He didn't wear a suit. He didn't give a speech. He stood near the table, smiled, and expressed gratitude to the students who approached. Afterwards that evening, returning to his apartment, he retrieved the well-worn Purdue sweatshirt from the box beneath his bed. He refrained from wearing it. Instead, he folded it carefully, placed it inside a fresh storage container, and added a file containing student thank-you notes alongside it. He understood that legacy isn't defined by positions. It's about the impact you create in others. He didn't require completing school to instruct. He didn't need a degree to guide. He simply needed to be present each day and demonstrate genuine care. And that's precisely what he intended to continue. Thank you for hearing Lamar's story. If it resonated with you, if it brought to mind someone you may have underestimated or someone who offered you support, please subscribe and share it with someone who could benefit from it. Because sometimes the most brilliant intellects reside in the most unassuming environments. After a black woman CEO experienced denial of service at her bank, she maintained composure. Within 5 minutes, the manager responsible for the incident was terminated. The errand was intended to be brief, approximately 10 to 15 minutes, a task easily managed between scheduled meetings. That morning, Nadira Langston, aged 48, the head of a multi-million-dollar tech firm located in Phoenix, Arizona, exited her driver's black Lincoln and entered Sycamore First Bank, carrying her company's banking portfolio carefully. She was unhurried. There was no need for haste. Her schedule had been completely free to allow her to complete the transfer of a substantial business account, which was one of several her company had been relocating for months. The account manager she typically collaborated with had retired, and today she was meeting the new team in person to finalize the documents. A simple, standard procedure. Her navy blue suit was expertly tailored. Her hair was styled in a neat, low bun, and she wore diamond studs in her ears. Understated, yet refined. Her heels made no clicking sound as she moved. They barely rustled. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who had held a position of authority for a significant period and no longer felt the need to demonstrate it. Approaching the reception desk, she provided her name, Nadira Langston. She explained she was there to meet with someone from the commercial accounts department. The young woman at the counter glanced up, briefly nodding while entering information into the system. "Okay, just a moment." It was then that things began. A woman, appearing to be in her mid-50s, with pale blonde hair and a rigid posture, emerged from a nearby glass office and walked over, offering a smile that seemed strained. "Can I help you with something?" she inquired. Her voice was concise. Nadira turned and offered her hand. "Yes, thank you. I'm Nadira Langston. I understand I'm scheduled to meet with someone from the business team. I'm completing a transfer." The woman didn't return the handshake. She looked at the folder Nadira held. "And you are?" Representing which company? I'm the CEO of Bluestone Dynamics. The account was previously managed by Peter Larson before his retirement. The manager raised an eyebrow, her skepticism evident. And you're here, unaccompanied? Yes, Nadira responded calmly. It's a private matter. A pause followed. One of those pauses that conveys more than a complete sentence. The kind where judgment is disguised as confusion. Right? The woman said, adjusting her position. We generally don't permit walk-ins for high-tier accounts unless it has been arranged beforehand. Nadira stated, still calm. She retrieved the confirmation email. Here's the appointment confirmation from your internal scheduler. Today, 9:30 a.m. The woman looked at the document, then back at Nadira. Are you certain this wasn't intended for another employee at your organization? Nadira blinked, deliberately and slowly. I operate the company. A brief silence followed. My name is Cheryl Bainbridge. I'm the branch manager. We're dealing with some concerning events lately. Individuals have been falsely presenting their credentials to gain access to valuable accounts. You appreciate the seriousness of this, I'm sure. Nadira fully grasped the situation. Cheryl, is it? She replied, her tone remaining calm and measured. Offering my license, corporate ID, and the transaction papers I'm here to approve? Cheryl's smile became strained. It's simply procedure, Ms. Langston. Please don't view it as directed at you. Nadira had encountered that phrase on countless occasions, in numerous boardrooms, airport lounges, and hotel lobbies. However, before she could add anything, Cheryl motioned to the receptionist. Could you please contact security? Just to err on the side of caution. It was necessary to confirm her statements. Nadira's mouth remained still. Her tone remained consistent. Are you summoning security? She asked. On the CEO of one of our most important prospective clients? Cheryl's shoulders became even more rigid. I didn't suggest that, I replied. I simply stated we needed to verify. At that moment, a subtle change occurred within a room. A quiet hum arose from a man seated in the waiting area. A brief look passed between two tellers positioned behind the counter. A palpable shift occurred. It was evident Nadira had followed every procedure correctly, yet she was still being made to feel like an outsider. Nadira, however, was not prepared to accept the situation. Not this time. The bank lobby wasn't crowded, but sufficient people were present to observe the unfolding events. An older man, waiting in line, moved uncomfortably. A woman seated close to the loan office took out her phone, feigning a check of her email, but her gaze remained fixed on Nadira and Cheryl. The security guard was not yet present, but Cheryl remained steadfast, as if anticipating immediate reinforcement. Nadira carefully opened her folder. It contained all necessary documentation to confirm her identity. Business cards, certified articles of incorporation, 2 forms of identification, and the bank's own records confirming the account transfer. She arranged them on the reception desk methodically, similar to a card dealer. Composed. Accurate. Here, she stated, that is my Arizona state ID. This document confirms my company's EIN. It includes the board resolution authorizing me as the account signer. In this, she indicated the final sheet, is your bank's welcome letter. Cheryl briefly reviewed the papers. Anyone can print documents, she stated, crossing her arms. I've worked in banking for 27 years. I've seen people pretend to be CFOs, consultants, even heirs to estates. We don't make exceptions just because someone claims they're important. Nadira's tone remained steady, but her eyes narrowed. So this isn't about the paperwork. It's about how I appear, correct? Cheryl let out a dismissive sound. I beg your pardon. You heard me. If I presented myself as a 55-year-old man in a Brooks Brothers suit, you'd be extending a handshake and offering coffee. Ma'am, please reduce your voice volume. Nadira responded. My voice is already subdued, her words sharp and clear. I am the CEO. You have reviewed the documents. You know my name. The only thing that seemed to register was that I wasn't what they anticipated. A silence followed. A protracted, uncomfortable silence, and then Cheryl spoke. It wasn't a shout, but it carried. You just don't look like a CEO? The statement lingered, heavy as smoke after a match. Someone inhaled sharply. Another person murmured, did she really just say that? The receptionist stood motionless behind the desk. She appeared to wish she could simply vanish. Nadira's eyelids lowered deliberately, yet her voice remained steady. I have secured more than $80 million in venture capital. I have spearheaded 3 product launches. I have presented as a keynote speaker at CES and finalized agreements in 6 countries. I don't need to appear any particular way to be completely myself, Cheryl began to respond. However, before she could, Nadira shifted slightly and asked the receptionist, "Is there a regional director assigned to this branch?" The young woman nodded hesitantly. "He is present today, in fact. It's a surprise audit. He's in the back conference room." Nadira's lips formed a slight smile. "Excellent. I wish to speak with him." Then, Cheryl intervened once more, visibly agitated. "There's no necessity for that. I am capable of managing this. Let's avoid making the situation worse." Nadira faced her directly. "You have already worsened this. You summoned security. You rejected every form of identification I presented. You challenged my position, my firm, and my credibility, all without initiating a single phone call to confirm any detail. Therefore, no, you're not capable of handling this." The room fell silent. The receptionist lifted the phone and initiated a call to an internal extension. "Mr. Dorsey?" she inquired. "There is someone present requesting to speak with you. Her name is Nadira Langston from Bluestone Dynamics." A brief hesitation. "Yes. All right. I will inform him." She ended the call and turned to Nadira, her eyes displaying surprise. "He is on his way out now." Meanwhile, Cheryl remained unaware of the significant misjudgment she had made. The door situated at the rear of the bank swung open, and a tall man, dressed in a charcoal suit, emerged. He moved with a brisk, purposeful stride, alert but not hurried. He held a slim leather tablet and wore an expression suggesting displeasure at being interrupted from meetings. However, his expression softened immediately when he saw Nadira. "Nadira Langston," he said, extending his hand. She shook it firmly. "Yes, you must be Mr. Dorsey." He continued, "Matthew Dorsey, Regional Director. I've heard a lot about you." Peter spoke very highly before he retired. "We appreciate the opportunity to manage your accounts." Cheryl's mouth parted slightly, and her face paled. Matthew turned to her, appearing puzzled. Did something go wrong with the meeting? Cheryl struggled to find the right words. "Yes, there was. I simply verified the credentials before providing access to the commercial suite. This follows our standard procedure." Nadira remained silent. She didn't need to. The receptionist, still positioned behind the counter, added cautiously. "She contacted security, sir. She stated that we were unable to verify the client's identity." Matthew blinked. "You contacted security? Regarding Ms. Langston?" "I was attempting to adhere to established procedures," Cheryl responded promptly. "We've experienced individuals recently presenting fabricated business credentials. I prefer not to assume any risks. You understand how crucial our commercial accounts are." He gave her a direct look. "Yes, I am aware. This is why we verify credentials, rather than form assessments of clients based on subjective impressions." Cheryl's shoulders tightened. "Excuse me?" she began. "I've reviewed the compliance logs. You didn't even access the file she presented. You disregarded the scheduled appointment. You dismissed the identification. I was safeguarding the bank," she asserted. "You embarrassed the bank," Matthew retorted. "You've publicly humiliated one of the most significant clients we've on board this year. In view of customers, in view of staff, with no justification." A security guard finally arrived at the front entrance, his radio clipped to his belt, meticulously scanning the room, as if anticipating trouble. Matthew dismissed him with a wave. "Everything's fine here, Eric," Cheryl repeated, her voice now trembling. False alarm. She had entered alone. Her name wasn't on the standard schedule. It was on the revised internal schedule, the one your assistant oversees. The same schedule you approve every Monday morning. "You simply didn't review it," Nadira stated, stepping forward slightly, her voice low but clear. "You hadn't acted without delay because of an absence. You paused because I didn't align with your preconceived notion of who should possess such authority." Matthew remained silent, allowing the quiet to linger. There was nothing further to elaborate on. Cheryl's mouth opened once more, but she spoke no words. "Ms. Langston," Matthew stated, pivoting with a return to decorum, "would you be willing to accompany me? I will personally oversee your transaction from my office." Nadira acknowledged with a single nod. "Certainly." They started to leave, passing the lines of desks and glass-walled offices. Cheryl stayed still by the front desk, her eyes wide, her face unreadable. No one moved towards her. The receptionist looked at her keyboard. The security guard walked away slowly, seeming unsure of what to do. Just as they were about to vanish down the hallway, Matthew halted and turned. Cheryl looked up, clearly surprised. "My office. After this meeting, we'll be discussing your role here in detail." He didn't raise his voice. Wasn't necessary. However, Cheryl already sensed a change in the atmosphere. Matthew's office presented a crisp, though understated, impression. It featured clean lines, 2 chairs positioned across from his desk, and a tall window allowing morning light to spread across the carpet. Nadira waited until he invited her to sit, and even then, she maintained a straight posture and a composed demeanor. He closed the door softly, then turned back to face her. "Ms. Langston, I want to apologize for what just happened. That should not have occurred. Not here. Not anywhere. You were treated unfairly," Nadira stated calmly, placing her folder on the desk. "However, this isn't the first time. It probably won't be the last," Matthew responded, leaning against the edge of his desk. "We have protocol for a reason, to prevent exactly this kind of thing from happening." Cheryl disregarded every step. "She didn't just disregard protocol," Nadira said. "She formed an opinion of me immediately upon seeing my face." Matthew breathed out his nose, crossing his arms. "I acknowledge that." He resumed looking at the documents she had placed before him, reviewing them without speaking. He wasn't hurried. He was carefully considering everything. "Everything is in the correct order," he stated. "I never questioned it. However, I do want to inquire. Did she allow you any opportunity to provide an explanation before summoning security?" "Not really," Nadira responded. "She recognized my name, saw my face, and heard my title, yet still inquired if the appointment belonged to another person." Matthew rubbed his jaw. "That will present a challenge for her. A significant one." Nadira inclined her head. "I didn't intend for anyone to lose their job. I am aware of that. However, sometimes repercussions are deserved." Immediately, his office phone vibrated. He answered, listened briefly, then instructed, "Send her in." A knock followed shortly, and Cheryl entered. The usual assuredness had vanished. Her face was pale, her shoulders slightly hunched. She walked as if unsure how to position her hands or where to look. "Ms. Langston," she began, her voice quiet. "I owe you an apology. I was mistaken. That wasn't my goal." "You don't have to pretend," Nadira stated, interrupting. Her voice wasn't harsh, only resolute. "You acted precisely as you did. You didn't believe I was who I claimed to be, and instead of verifying, you chose to embarrass me." Cheryl looked to Matthew, visibly wanting him to intervene. He remained silent. "I've spent over 2 decades in this field," she continued. "I've witnessed fraud, identity theft, all sorts of deception. And none of that pertains to me," Nadira stated. "You didn't err due to caution. You err because you believed you could evade detection," Matthew finally said. "Cheryl, following a review of events this morning, encompassing internal audit records and client appointment logs, I have decided to end your employment, effective immediately." Cheryl blinked. "And? Are you serious?" "Yes, I am," Matthew replied. "You breached client protocol, showed disrespect to one of our most valuable account holders, and created a public disturbance that jeopardized the bank's reputation. This wasn't an isolated mistake. It was a pattern, and it concludes here." She appeared ready to retaliate, but the atmosphere offered no space for her to exert herself. She faced Nadira. "I didn't intend to cause you any personal offense," she said. "You didn't offend me," Nadira replied softly. "You showed disrespect. There's a distinction." Cheryl lowered her gaze, then pivoted, exited the doorway, and left it slightly open. Matthew remained still for a moment. Subsequently, he settled into his desk chair and raised his head. "I trust that achieves a degree of responsibility. This is a beginning," Nadira responded. However, beyond the confines of that office, the narrative was quickly moving away from the bank. Information doesn't spread rapidly within a bank, except when a significant event occurs. And what unfolded that morning at Sycamore was not merely significant, it was irrefutable. As Nadira and Matthew left the office, the ambience in the lobby had fundamentally changed. Patrons remained silent. Tellers murmured behind their workstations. Cheryl's absence was more pronounced than her presence had ever been. The nameplate had already been taken from the front glass office, as if she had never worked there. Matthew walked Nadira out personally. "I'll ensure the rest of the paperwork is managed by someone capable," he said. "You shouldn't have to experience this level of absurdity. Ever." Nadira nodded. Accepting the folder, he returned to her. "The paperwork is the straightforward part," she replied. He gave a quiet, respectful laugh. Indeed, they arrived at the front doors, where two customers graciously held them open. A teller rose from behind the counter and offered a small wave, hesitant yet genuine. The sun was ascending higher above Phoenix. The air was dry, and the pavement was warm. Nadira hesitated close to the curb, her driver advancing, the car door already ajar. She glanced back at Matthew. "A statement you made in your office resonated with me, that occasionally consequences are deserved." He affirmed this with a nod. "Yes, I agree," she stated. "But repercussions lacking comprehension do little to affect change." Matthew lifted his eyebrows, showing interest. "I don't want Cheryl to experience hardship," Nadira proceeded. "I need people to understand this wasn't about me. This occurs for Black professionals, particularly women, on a daily basis. It happens at airports, restaurants, stores, and meetings. And frequently, no one faces termination. They're simply disregarded." Again and again, he remained silent. He allowed her to continue. Perhaps for the first time, someone like him genuinely listened. "If the bank is to address this with seriousness," she stated, "refrain from simply publishing a statement online. Avoid issuing a standard apology. Initiate a dialogue. Instruct your managers regarding the oversights made. Prevent this from recurring for the next woman who enters that establishment." Matthew inhaled deeply, his posture now slightly more burdened. "You are correct. I am unable to reverse the events that transpired. However, I can ensure they contribute to a positive outcome. That's the true measure, isn't it?" Nadira responded. "Not what one accomplishes with an audience, but what one alters when unobserved." She entered the vehicle, and the door closed behind her. The interior was quiet, but the silence felt clean. Her driver glanced back through the mirror. "Everything satisfactory, Ms. Langston?" She looked at her hands, then out the window at the glass facade of the bank. Cheryl had resolved to ignore her. The crucial decision, the one that would have significant impact, had already been made by someone else. "Yes, it has," she said softly. Nadira didn't know that within 24 hours the entire country would be discussing what transpired inside that branch. It began with a tweet, just a few lines from someone who had been sitting near the loan officer's desk that morning. "Just witnessed a Black woman CEO get denied service at her own bank." She remained composed, publicly addressed the bias, and the manager was terminated immediately. I don't know her name, but I won't forget her demeanor. By lunchtime, the tweet had surpassed 40,000 likes. By evening, it appeared on Instagram, then Facebook, and subsequently on local news. A local blogger identified Nadira's name by comparing information with a press release Bluestone Dynamics released earlier that month. A Phoenix reporter verified the information with the bank. By nightfall, Nadira Langston was trending across the nation. She made no public statements. Wasn't necessary. Others shared their experiences. LinkedIn was filled with accolades. Corporate professionals, frequently Black women, recounted similar situations, being questioned at the valet of their own office buildings, asked to show ID 3 times before boarding first-class flights, being addressed as sweetie, even while leading negotiations worth millions. People described Nadira as graceful, resilient, and composed. However, those who understood the situation better explained that it was more than grace. It was a matter of survival. Simultaneously, Sycamore First corporate headquarters mobilized. Within 24 hours, they issued a statement recognizing the incident, confirming Cheryl Bainbridge's departure from employment, and affirming the company's dedication to equity and continued training. This response proved insufficient for the public. Numerous comments appeared, questioning how many other Cheryls remain working in your branches. And do your executives grasp that implicit bias training cannot address issues permitted by your hiring processes? Black women should not be expected to remain composed when facing disrespect. Nadira made no public statements regarding the situation until 3 days later when she consented to an interview on a podcast hosted by a longtime friend and business strategist, Leona Bates. They faced each other in a silent studio in Tempe, with microphones activated and without any prepared notes. Leona began softly, asking, "You've remained silent while the internet has erupted. What prompted this response now?" Nadira answered, "Because the matter is no longer about me." Leona focused on what this situation highlighted. Specifically, that despite possessing the correct titles, documents, and credentials, people still perceive you as an outsider. Speaking out is then labeled as causing a disturbance, while remaining quiet is interpreted as agreement. It's a draining predicament, regardless of the choice. They discussed the matter for almost an hour, extending beyond the bank to address the significant emotional burden of maneuvering within established hierarchies while burdened by long-standing prejudices. Nadira remained composed. She didn't express sadness or frustration. Instead, she simply stated the facts, clearly, steadily, and without question. Following the broadcast, a fresh surge of interest emerged. This interest was authentic, thoughtful, and not superficial. Fellow CEOs contacted her. Business publications featured the narrative. A headline declared, "She didn't raise her voice. She raised the bar." Nevertheless, Nadira maintained a grounded perspective. She did not desire recognition. She sought transformation. And she understood that meaningful change rarely appears in news headlines. The bias appeared in hiring practices, policy decisions, and even in determining who was initially believed. Even after the initial news coverage faded and the events became part of collective memory, those who witnessed her that morning at the bank still remembered what they saw. A few weeks later, Nadira addressed a room full of college students at Arizona State University. She had not intended to give any public speeches that season, as her schedule was already very full. When a business ethics professor contacted her and requested a conversation with her class, she readily agreed. The event was understated. There were no stage lights or press coverage, just 40 students, some taking notes in notebooks, others using laptops, eager to hear from the woman whose experience transformed a regular bank visit into a nationwide conversation. She presented no slides. There was no podium. She simply walked to the room's front, paused, and began speaking. "I won't be telling a storybook narrative," she stated. "I won't be suggesting that if you labor diligently, no one will challenge you, because that isn't invariably accurate." The room fell silent, all attentive. You can possess the title, the suit, the contracts, the track record, and still be informed that you don't belong, not due to any failings on your part, but because someone else cannot envision your triumph without a face resembling their own. She surveyed the room. Her voice remained gentle, but each word resonated. And in those moments, a choice presents itself. Do you contract to ease their discomfort, or do you maintain your full presence, even if it creates tension in the space? A young man seated in the front row raised his hand. He asked, "How did you manage to remain composed during that experience? Weren't you feeling anger?" Nadira responded with a slow nod. "Naturally, I was. But anger is only valuable if you understand how to channel it. That day, I employed it to remain grounded. I employed that tactic to ensure she couldn't dismiss me without looking me in the eye while doing it." Another hand then rose, this time from a young woman. "What advice would you offer someone just beginning, who hasn't developed a resume like yours?" Nadira hesitated. "Recognize your value before anyone else attempts to define it for you. And if they try to diminish you, speak regardless, even if your voice trembles." There is a certain quality to her delivery, as if she were addressing herself as much as the listener. Following the presentation, students formed a line to express their gratitude. Some simply desired to shake her hand. Others sought guidance. One young woman, speaking softly, shared, "I'm studying engineering. I'm considering dropping out. I didn't believe there was a place for someone with my background." Nadira responded, making direct eye contact, "There is. And if there isn't, create it." That evening, back in her office, Nadira found herself alone at her desk, enjoying a cup of tea. Her inbox remained full. Her phone continued to buzz. The excitement hadn't fully subsided. She understood that the public's attention would fade. However, certain individuals would retain the memory. The students, the customers present in that bank lobby, the employees who witnessed a manager lose her position due to someone's unwillingness to yield. And perhaps, in the future, when a woman like her entered a place where she wasn't anticipated, she might be greeted instead of questioned. She might be respected, all because of one moment, one voice, one refusal to remain silent. If this story resonated with you, even slightly, please share it. Change doesn't always begin with prominent demonstrations or widespread media attention. Occasionally, it originates with a composed, persistent voice that states, "This isn't right."